Welcome, welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Ed for letting everybody in as they join. So today we're going to do things, we'll give them another couple of minutes. Thank you, Poland. It's okay if you don't have video. You're coming in from Poland. That's awesome. Um, so we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Today, if you've been on any of our calls, you know that generally this being the Better Man movement and the we usually have Ray or there are 4-5 partners. I'm the only woman. And this being International Women's Month, we'll get into why, the case against just a month. I'm presenting. Today, I brought some very special guests on so that we could not silence men or move men to the side, but give men a chance to listen and to center women's voices so that we can hear some different stories. And I hope that either you'll be pleasantly surprised and learn some and grow some. And also at the same time, hopefully we'll find some advocates out there who are like, this is what I've been thinking. Now this is what I want to start doing. So this month we're doing our call saying making work for caregivers. And we have our special guest, Salva, founder of MomWarrior, and Amy Henderson of TendLab. They're going to introduce themselves because I'm a much bigger fan when you have the time to let people introduce themselves. Ed, can we have the next slide? And now I'm going to read. The Better Man Movement is a US-based organization. We recognize that our work is done on Indigenous land. We honor ancestors and elders past, present, and those to come. We also recognize the widespread presence of institutional racism, misogyny, ableism, ageism, and LGBTQIA+ phobias. We use our diverse bodies, voices, and lived experiences in service of dismantling those systems to ensure equity, justice, and liberation for all of us. If any of this excludes anyone, please let us know because we're on a path to understanding and improving. Thank you. Next slide, Ed. And we always like to take a moment of silence for all of those who have been impacted by institutions and systems. We're going to have to change our slide. And, I wondered when this one would be dated because I also want to recognize my family and my people and those around us who are in the AAPI community who are also feeling deep, deep oppression and violence. So we can take just a moment to hold some space for all of that happening now. And now to the guidelines. So today on the call, we would invite you to change your name and update your preferred pronouns. That gives permission for everyone to be able to show up in the way that they want to be identified and respected. We also ask you to respect and honor confidentiality, no screenshots, even as inspiring as it may be. Let people share their own stuff on Twitter. Then I would say speak your truth, because your truth very likely is also speaking for someone else who may not have the voice yet to share that. Be present and focused on the conversation. I know I have a million other things pulling, and I'm really choosing for myself and for everyone else to be as present as I can right here. Come curious. When I ask questions first, I always get answers that I would have never expected. So that's really important. And that helps me to be open to what's possible. Park judgments outside and let's be present here and do what we can to connect. One person speaks at a time to ensure everyone can be heard and to hear. And then our goal is to create a safe space for people to share their lived experiences so that we can connect and grow. And now on to the show. I'm Kriz Bell. I'm generally not in front of the camera, so it's my pleasure today to greet and meet everybody. I have my two dear friends, lovely, amazing people, Salva and Amy Henderson. Tet, can you start us off yourself? Then we'll bounce on over to Amy.
Yes, thank you for having me today. So I'm Salva, and a little bit about me. I founded a passion project back in 2016 called MomWarrior. And initially it was to amplify and spotlight the challenges of working moms in corporate America, which quickly became a platform to amplify the voices really of working parents and working moms of color, um, because our experiences I found were a lot different. Um, and so, we started with a summit in 2017, had about 75 people attend. And in 2018, I had a goal of 300 people attending that conference, and we had over 400 join. So it's been a great movement. And I'm also currently an org strategist for a software company in Silicon Valley. I am a mom to 4 young girls, ages 6, 8, 12, and 15. I think I got that right. So distance learning has been, and the pandemic has been really real for us this past year.
Wow, it's a year.
Yeah, it's been a year, and on.
Are we going to start doing it like we do with kids? For 23 months, she's 23 months old, that kind of thing. Amy, welcome.
Thanks, Kriz. It's great to be here. So my name is Amy Henderson, and I am a movement builder by background. I had co-founded an organization with Ban Jones and the rock star Prince called Yes We Code when I accidentally got pregnant with my third kid and had 3 under the age of 4. And when I was out on parental leave, because I'm lucky to be in the 14% of Americans who have access to paid family leave, I started calling up first the working moms I most admired to say, look, is it this hard for me to be a working mom because of me and my unique shortcomings and the bad decisions I've made? Or is it just this hard to be a working parent in the US? And I discovered it's just that hard to be a working parent in the US. And in fact, it's harder to be a working parent in the US than in any other developed nation in the world. And at first, I only wanted to talk to moms. I thought moms would only ever understand what it was like to be working and tending to children. I thought we had a unique and special bond with children that men could never develop. And I'm really happy to say, and so happy to be here, that I discovered this whole body of research in neuroscience. I have a little bit of a background in neuroscience. And there's a neuroscientist who teaches at the Yale School of Medicine called Dr. Ruth Feldman. She's been studying the impact of parenting on the brains of men and women. And she's found that men who show up for the job, to the degree that they show up for the job, can transform their brains as much as moms. And that period of the year surrounding the birth of one's child is the greatest potential for plasticity in the adult human experience. So that year of experiencing these drastic neurological changes as women are, the identity shift that comes with it, a drastically different orientation to the world that comes from having a child. And so I ended up leaving what I was doing with Yes We Code and launching a business called TendLab, which has been working inside companies for the last 5 years. We started in 2015, so now 6 years, working to optimize the workplace for parents, all with the understanding that when supported, unlocks career critical skills. And chiefly among those is emotional intelligence, enhanced courage, and the capacity to collaborate, which is critical for success in the modern workplace. And I would say that, one of the things that I'm really, most proud of and most inspired by in this journey is the way I have shifted from thinking it's only moms that can understand to realizing that actually men and dads need to be central to this conversation. And I have a book I've written that's coming out on Mother's Day called Tending Parenthood and the Future of Work. And I'm already at work on my second book, which is called Dad and Dads, How We're going to Change the Game for Working Parents. So I'm really, really excited to be here in conversation with so many men who care about changing the game for caregivers and centering a voice and a perspective that for too long has been undervalued.
Yay, you guys rock. So the first topic, I've had topics swirling. We had a prep call that really brought us to 100 things we could talk about. But today, the thing that's top of my mind is benefits and behaviors. And then to really go into the alliteration, I wanted to blog about this before we got on the call. But you know what? I couldn't find the time. I couldn't make the time. I'm going to be taking some time because another word, B, for burnout. I'm going to be taking a little bit of time off. So there's so much swirling, and whether, COVID, just like all of the other isms and the pieces that we're working under in our world, they're not new, but COVID really exacerbated it, has surfaced it and brought it out. So I would say, for me, it was really important, and especially when we talked and agreed on this, that this not be a conversation about women as caregivers. Yes, it's International Women's Month. This is just the time that I thought was great to be able to bring it to the fore. Because when you make this women's work or caregiving as a women's role, that gives a whole bunch of people an opportunity to step out, and not step out because they're bad people. I don't want to shame or blame anybody, but step out because maybe they have other things, or maybe because it's not socially acceptable and their peers aren't going to embrace them as jumping in and identifying and owning that caregiver role. Tet, Amy?
I actually have something to say about that. And Tet, I just want to acknowledge too that your leadership in this is really important. And this is the first time we've been on a sort of platform together, and I'm really excited and looking forward to more. So what I can say is, having come from a background of being a white person working in racial justice, I think caregivers, particularly moms, feels a lot of men feel as though they don't have a voice in this conversation, or that it's not okay for them to speak up, or that they, it's not really necessarily their concern. And I think, it's uncomfortable, being a white person spending most of my career in racial justice. It is not comfortable. And a lot of times, I represent, just by my appearance, what people are angry about, and the privilege that I have that people of color do not is something that inspires strong feelings. And I think it's critically important that white people are involved in the fight for racial justice. And I think it's critically important that men recognize their role in solving for the injustice that we have in our nation around caregiving. And unlike with racial justice, where as a white person, I will never be a person of color, I think when we talk about caregiving, or when we talk about motherhood, and we talk about elder care, and we talk about, Joseph Fuller at Harvard says that, roughly 75% of Americans are involved in some form of caregiving. We're not just talking about moms who show up to tend to others. And the more we can expand our definition of what it means to be a nurturer, what it means to be a caretaker, and the value that comes from that, I think the better off we'll be. And the last thing I'll say is, McKinsey big study around men who had taken parental leave, and they found that even the men who suffered disastrous, sort of negative long-term consequences in their career as a result of taking that time, even those men were glad they'd done it and would encourage their peers to do the same. Culture where men who show up for parenthood aren't penalized professionally and can recognize the value of that experience in the way that women have been able to do.
It's our mutual friend, Tina Lee, who I've always heard reference the mom penalty and dad bonus. Ted?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Amy, for that, because I think a lot of the time when we talk about caregiving, it's usually, oh, parents, right? There's a whole generation that's also caregiving for other loved ones. And I also like to expand the definition of caregiving as if you are a people leader, or if you're managing a team, you're also caring for your people, right? So I would really like to expand that notion of caregiving doesn't necessarily mean family, but you are at work and you are taking care of each other and your colleagues and your peers. And I think that's equally important as well. And in terms of, the burnout is real. I hit my pandemic wall early this year, late last year, early this year. I can't believe we're almost at April. And I had shared my very real caregiving story, and actually was asked to, for a former company that I worked with, and shared that, helping distance learning for 4 kids, so being their teacher, being their therapist, being a short order chef, being all the things, dual income family, so both my husband and I work. First it was okay, we got our groove going, but it just, I hit the wall when one of my kids experienced really severe anxiety and depression, to the point where right before I would head into a meeting, she would have an episode. I would have to calm her down, hold her hand while she's sitting under my desk, and facilitate a meeting like nothing is happening. And I shared that. And it is the hardest thing when you have to show up at work and then you're holding a child's hand and you're like, I'll get to you once I'm done with this thing. So, that to me, I think, was when it hit me that there is no way there. I mean, this is, I don't even know, props to the single parents out there, and props to the folks and folks to the folks who are parenting, loved one with special needs, because it really is, it's really hard. And so after that I shared my lived experience, things kind of changed for me at work. And talk about gaslighting and the caregiver bias. And so I eventually left because it was no longer good for me. So one of my takeaways from that experience was when I did meet with the big boss, and explained, I didn't blame anyone. I just said, hey, I'm not challenged with the work that I'm doing. Give me more stuff. And said, well, but you have all these responsibilities. Are you sure you want to take more on? Well, let me make that decision. Work is something that I can control, and something that I'd like, this is what I do. So don't make the decision for me to not show up at work. So anyway, was hoping that conversation would have gone further. But if you're wanting an allyship, that would have been a perfect opportunity to be an ally, especially if you talk about being committed to diversity and gender equity. That would have been a perfect opportunity for this leader to say, okay, I hear you. Let's do something about this, right? So I'll pause there.
I'm so glad that you brought up, and that's part of, it's, running the panel. It's one of those secret, oh yes, she's going to say it. Awesome. It's going to come up. That's why I ask people to raise their hands about being a caregiver, because we have such specific definitions. And as a single mom, solo parent, partner, I do all kinds of things, business wise, it's really important to change those definitions. Because managers are tending teams. Managers are, and in COVID, with the 21st century, there are a whole bunch of skill sets that a lot of us have been to have, and there isn't a lot of support for it. There isn't even a lot of language for it. And then COVID comes, and we're expected to be able to, for a lot of us, production gaps or production goals didn't change, but our capacity did change. And there's no conversation about it, like what Tet said. So one of the things, and we do have, you might have a benefits package, but what behaviors are you actually using to take advantage of those benefits? Amy, you've mentioned some of this when, men actually take family leave, depending on what state you live in, depending on what you're, the dad bonus, men usually get, they get lifted up if they do that. Anything else, Amy?
Yeah, well, I'll share two things. One is I mentioned earlier about the neuroscience research discovered. So I want to just put a pin on that in terms of how I experienced that in my personal life and how I know that that's possible and true. And then I'll talk about the workplace, because I think that's also, obviously the focus of what we're talking about today. So when I discovered that a man's brain could change as much as a primary care breastfeeding birth mother's, this was when my third child was about 6 months old. And my husband, who would sleep, and I mean like sleep, snoring his face off with the first two kids, and up until the 6-month mark with my third kid, he said, I'm happy to like help out. I just don't hear things. I'm not, I can't show up. So I started waking up when my littlest was 6 months old, whenever she woke up at night. And he was like, and then I would wake him, and then he'd, oh, all right. And he would go. And we found that when he went to her, she fell asleep faster and stayed asleep longer. So we were 3 months into this. So she's 9 months old. We're in the kitchen one morning, and he said, hey, how come you didn't wake me up last night? And I said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? He had woken up, I had stayed asleep, and he'd gone and tended to our child. And that was an inflection point for me. That's when I started to open my eyes to the fact that men could be a part of this conversation, that men were just as capable as women. And fast forward, he has a very different relationship with our third child. She looks at pictures of books with mommy babies and, mommies and their babies. And she says, oh, daddy, right? Like she has a very different relationship. He has transformed in his capacity and his confidence. And some research out of the Better Life Lab and the New America Foundation indicates that men's confidence in being able to show up as a caregiver heavily influences whether they do show up as caregivers. And so I'm here to tell you that from lived experience, from neuroscience research, that it's something that you have to earn it to gain it, and you can do it. And I know that translates beyond just, the children, but to all types of caregiving. As it relates to the workplace, what we know is that there's less than a third of men in the US who have access to any form of parental leave, and that men who take parental leave are likely to face stigma because of it. The fatherhood bonus that we talked about, which is roughly that men who have children are likely to receive an uptick in their careers versus women who have children are likely to suffer a penalty financially in their careers. That's usually only occurs when the man doesn't appear to have any caregiving responsibilities. And so if you posture as though, oh, that's all taken care of on the home front, I'm not a part of that, then you're going to benefit. But if it's visible that you are an active, responsible caretaker, then you're likely to face a similar stigma as women. And for that reason, men often don't take parental leave, or what we discovered in our research is that they might take it, but they won't claim it as that. So a dad will take like maybe, short days on Fridays for a couple months after their baby's born, or they might take, a day or two off a month to be with their baby. They'll do it to be with their baby, but they'll call it something else because they don't want to face the stigma associated with it. And so what I would say is, if you're a man, first recognize that you can be an incredible caretaker. So show up for it in all areas of your life, with children, with your elders, with your loved ones, and then be visible about it. Tell people you are caretaking, and recognize that if you are empowered enough to face that stigma, if you're empowered enough to claim the power of showing up, claim the skills you develop in research tells us the skills are significant. I don't know what industry everybody here is in. I don't know what field of line, what work you do, but your capacity to be emotionally intelligent and to collaborate well and to have courage, I can't imagine any field that won't be helpful. And so if you can, in your own mind and in the communities in which you operate, claim the power that you gain by caring for others, then you're going to help all of us. And you're going to be able to build a better future, not just for yourself, but for the future of humanity.
And there's so much in COVID with, there's so much in COVID around caregiving And it's not just kids, it's spouses, it's families, it's friends. I mean, how many of us I've had a number of people who I know have really weathered the pandemic alone. So on top of my caregiving for my daughter, I'm caregiving for my mother, who's she's 70+ years old. I have neighbors who I've had to caregive for because I know they don't have anybody. Then there are times when my partners and coworkers are going through something, so we need to show up for them. And caregiving doesn't always mean a bowl of soup. Sometimes it means, how can I jump in there for you? Or like for Tet, how can I hold space? I had someone that the call started and I didn't know where it was going to go. And I asked them, what can I do for you in this call right now? Is my role to listen? Am I listening for something to do? Or am I just holding this space? How can we do this? And negotiating that emotional labor is also really a tough one. You don't want to say, here, tell me everything and what to do. So, Ted?
Yeah. One of the things that I just learned actually this week is I took a conscious leadership class. And there's this thing around being above the line or below the line. And so when you're below the line, you're closed. You don't want to listen to any other opinions. You think you're right, and when you're above the line, you're curious, you're open. And I do think that, at work, and I speak to more of the managers, if you are a manager, because I think you are a key stakeholder in this, is do regular check-ins with your team. And instead of asking about work, ask about how they're feeling. And it's 3 words: are you okay? Not how are you, but are you okay? And really listen, encourage the dialogue, but also respect their privacy if they don't want to talk about it. And I do encourage people to use and we've used this at work now, where people will start a meeting and they'll say, just wanted to let you know I'm below the line today. So that prompts people to say, okay, should we talk about why you're below the line? Like, what's going on for you? So there's that. I also wanted to share, I saw this tweet where the mom, I think, was traveling, and this person said, hey, so who's watching your kids? And my husband is, and it's like, oh wow, that's so sweet of them, that's so awesome. Or when my husband goes to the grocery store with 4 of my girls, oh, look at what a good dad. And what he's learned to do is say, yeah, both my wife, I'm giving my time, I'm giving time for my wife to decompress as I'm with my kids. Or like normalize the behavior of having your kids go to the grocery store with you. Not that, oh, look at this amazing dad who is babysitting their kid. I think, there's, yeah, all the time. It's almost like, yeah, my husband's really excited to be a dad, to be a father to his children. So I think it's how do we flip that and reframe that so that it's, yes, I have my kids with me because both my wife and I work, and I happen to have the time, and it's a balancing act. So I think it's speaking up as well, and taking one for the team.
Definitely. I mean, we had a call, I think it was yesterday, and executive who was on a panel, it was a debrief call after the conference. And he said, oh, I'm not on video because I have my 4-month-old daughter. And all of us, I mean, we were kind of fighting for the mic to say, no, bring that video up. And one of the thing that I noticed that I hadn't really paid much attention to it before was that when he came on video, not only did his daughter stop doing all of the fussing and pay attention to me that apparently he said she had been doing, she looked at the video camera, we all looked at her, and it actually, I don't know, I have no neuroscience background, but I think our serotonin levels all seemed to go up. It was also my daughter's 16th birthday. So to see that, I was like, it did a whole other thing to me. But these normalizing those behaviors and bringing that up, to me, it's so important. Like Ted, what you've said about, your husband saying, yeah, I'm excited to take the chance to be a father to my children instead of you're babysitting, or, ooh, good for you, kind of a thing. Let's normalize it, because in normalizing that, that's how we can strike some balance for all caregiving. We're going to go to breakout rooms in a couple of minutes, but either one of you want to chime in on anything before we go, Amy?
Yeah, can I say one thing about that? Ted, you had talked earlier about the importance of recognizing caregiving in the workplace, how we show up to care for each other in the workplace. And, one of the things we discovered, there's another body of research by some sociologists where they found that in the workplace, when a man is asked by his coworkers for help and it's outside the scope of his direct line responsibility, if he doesn't help his coworkers, it doesn't negatively he gets a boost in his performance evaluations. And it's the exact opposite for women. If a woman is asked by someone who isn't, sort of in her direct line of work to help them, and she doesn't help them, it negatively impacts her performance evaluation. But if she does, it doesn't positively impact her. And so what we found in our sort of focus groups and surveys inside companies is that that's exponentially true for moms, that moms more than anybody else are expected to care for those around them, do some of the emotional labor, do some of the sort of like tending to others' workloads as well, without being compensated, acknowledged, or valued for it. And that if they refuse to do that work, if they set boundaries, that they're likely to be penalized for it. And it's this sort of like, it's something that you can sort of think, oh, maybe that's true, maybe that's possible. And then you look at this large study around it, and we looked at our data around it, and it was like, wow, this is a consistent thing that's happening. And so to the extent that we as moms can recognize that, to the extent that we can acknowledge that and put it up front in our relationships with others, and for the incredible men who are on this call, who I can't say enough about, thank you for showing up for this conversation. And I ask you to look at that in your organizations, to think about whether or not you are showing up to care for others. And if you're recognizing who's being asked and who's being penalized if they don't do it. I think it's really important that we start looking at all these unconscious ways that we have expectations, and the way that we gender, we look, gender is a big variable in the way that we expect people to show up, especially when people are visibly caretakers in other areas of their lives.
And then,
yeah, go ahead, Ted.
Sorry, Chris. And that is amplified, Amy, too, with the research that I found, especially if you're a caregiver of color. So, that is even more true, the bias that happens there, where we're asked to take care of the things, right? So thanks for bringing that up.
I wanted to amplify all of those points, that it's the role, however you show up, however you look, when we were in person, whether it's on a Zoom, assumed caregiving roles. Who are you assumed to be a nurturer? And one of the things, like Ed said here, as men are normalized as caregivers, we will see their management and especially their leadership improve. We wanted to open it up to some group discussion before we went into breakout. Ed, can I invite you, because as a partner of the Better Man, to jump in and use your voice, add your voice, please?
Sure. When I was hearing this conversation, particularly this last part, and it's all been absolutely brilliant as far as I'm concerned, I realized that management's management, but leadership has such a huge caretaking component. If you can hear that word without it being, without any baggage on it, just my job as a leader is to, just what Amy said, are you okay? Just to ask that question, or when I get on a conference call and I hear that somebody's clearly not okay, what's going on? So, I think that as men's nurturing, caretaking, caregiving, better than caretaking, becomes more and more the rule, as we're hearing that it is, then we're going to see a whole different kind of leadership. And Amy, I don't know what you want to quote me on, but sure.
So Ed, I just wanted to share, and I can still remember this. One of the one of my biggest supporters, and I still adore this man to this day, was we were 3 weeks traveling, and work was crazy. And I came in on a Friday, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm at work." He goes, "Go home." He said, "Go be a mom. Go be a mom." Just, he's like, "You've been on the plane for the past 3 weeks. Go be a mom." The fact that he even just acknowledged that and said, just you don't have to be here today. Just go. Everything's going to be taken care of. He took care of me at that moment. And so I went home, and I was just floored because I've never had that happen to me before. And every time we had our meeting, he started with, "How are you doing? Are you okay? How are the kids?" It was never about, okay, so let's take a look at the work that's laid out, right? It's kind of just that check-in, but holding that space for your people as well.
And I want to call him my partner, Ray, but I also want to say we start all of our meetings as partners with Better Man with a check-in. And it's those check-ins that led us to having these Friday calls. And before we go I'm going to ask Ray to talk about rewriting a playbook. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms because we have a question that this tees up very nicely too.
Thanks, Kriz. Amy, when you were talking earlier and you mentioned the stigma, it immediately made me think about the outdated playbook of what it means to be a man, the very kind of masculinity that we don't advocate for here. And Tet, when you mentioned the glamorization of a guy just taking his kids to the store, it occurred to me that, in all the work that we do, we're always talking to the guys that you have a responsibility to help us rewrite the book on what it means to be a man so you can be an effective ally and leader. And I don't know how to say this, but there's a responsibility, not just by the men, but for the women, great women on this call, just to encourage, but not glamorize, just normalize. That's the word that keeps coming through for this. So I just felt it, necessary to bring that into the space, because we all need to be able to do this. And lastly, it's this whole notion of, and Ed, I think you mentioned it, the nurturing piece for guys is available, always has been. So at the end of the day, the blending of our masculine and feminine traits, regardless of how we identify, are there and available to us. So there you go.
Thanks, Ray. Ed, can you share a slide for the breakout room? Because this really brings us exactly to where we want to go for our breakout question. What behaviors would you like to normalize in the workplace? What would really open the workplace up, I would add? What would make those changes that we're talking about? We're going to go into breakouts for about 5-7 minutes, whatever we usually do. I don't usually do that. I don't have to take care of that. So I'm going to leave it to my trusty colleagues to send us into breakouts. And if it means that we're going to lose people from the discussion because you don't want to go into a breakout, turn off your video and don't hit the button join breakout. I really hope you will, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. But I invite you to do what you need to do.
I have a 17-and-a-half-year-old. I have a partner who has a major mental health disorder that requires hospitalization and constant care. And I also have a 2-and-a-half-year-old who is still nursing. So all of these things I can kind of juggle, and I'm doing all this, but how do you guys handle, how do we normalize nursing at work? Like I need to be able to just nurse my kid and not have to turn off the camera and do 100 other things. What do you think?
And even if we give people privacy to go and nurse, not have it be in a closet where maybe it's dirty or it's in the dark and I feel like you have me here because I should be ashamed. I haven't nursed for a long time. I don't want to think that my 16-year-old is nursing, because that to me would be a different conversation. But you know what, if you're there, then good. But there's a whole stigma around all of that. And I remember nursing going, ew, I don't want to, or even pumping, I don't want to do this in here. I had to do it in the back room of a motorcycle shop once for a client that I worked with. And I was like, So how can we embrace all of these things? Anybody else want to jump in? Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
So can I just share?
Yes.
So Jennifer, here's an example. I feel like I'm just going to share my examples, a lived experience. I was pregnant. I was also pumping in my car in a bathroom stall that was open. So that was back in the day. Like now there are nursing rooms and lactation rooms everywhere, right? But I was in a meeting and with a client and pregnant with my second child, and he said, well, you know, that's pretty efficient, right? She can just go out in the parking lot, deliver her baby, and come back for this deployment that we're doing. I still remember that. I still remember who he is. That would have been an opportune moment for somebody in the room to say that wasn't appropriate, because it got really awkward. Like everyone just said, and what's hard was, because I was a consultant, you know, this person was my client. He was paying, he was paying for my time. So, you know, it's like, you know, I took it as, okay, well, I guess he thinks I'm efficient and I'm good at the work that I'm doing. But that comment has stuck with me. I still, and it's been years. My daughter is what now, 12. And that comment has stuck with me, because that's like, okay, if I ever hear something similar, I will make sure to stand up for that person and say something, because that wasn't cool, right? So I think that's one of them.
So can I ask, do you think that being an, and I'm assuming right now that you identify as a person who's not white, but do you think that played into it at all? Because I heard things when I was pregnant. People said things out loud to me that left my jaw hanging open. Things like, oh, well, you know, white women struggle to give birth, but like brown and black women, they just pop them out so easy. Like these words were said to me by people, and they, like you, they have stayed with me. Like, it's, you know, it's 2000 and whatever, and you just said that out loud to me and you're serious, you know? Do you think that prejudice played a role in that at all?
You know, I probably, I don't know, you know, it's like, oh, of course you have that many kids. Oh, what do you mean by that? I wasn't planning on having any children ever, because I was so focused on my career. I wanted to be a CEO someday, right? And you know, maybe I think the universe had other plans for me and said, no, I'm gonna bless you with 4 kids, because life isn't just about this. That took a while for me to really, because I pride myself in the work that I do, and I'm a driven and ambitious woman. And in my culture, right, it's like my dad loved my business cards, because every time I'd give him a business card, it would be like director of whatever, or, you know, global blah blah blah, and he would show it off to his friends. And so I've since reframed that to say, what does success mean for me now? It's no longer about the success of my parents, but that took a lot of rewiring. And I think that's why I'm doing this work, because I'm seeing that a lot of women, and specifically women, you know, caregivers, and when women of color, when you reach that point of intersectionality, it gets really, really hard for us to speak up or ascend or do anything at work. And this is why I've brought men into the conversation. So a lot of my conferences, I always have men there, because they are our biggest allies. They are the ones who can really help us move the needle. I still think through the conversation I had before I quit, you know, just my recent company. And, you know, he said, yeah, I totally understand. I hear you. And I thought, okay, this is good. So now he knows, right? What they did instead was they approved a rec that was a level above me, and told me I couldn't apply for the job because I didn't have a specific experience they were looking for. And if you look at the job description, it was everything that they had hired me to do initially. So that was a big, like, okay, that was a really telling instance. If real allyship, he would have said, let's not post that rec. Let's talk to Ted to see what she can do and what she wants to do, because she, we value her, we value her work, whatever, right? That would have been a better conversation versus saying, oh, by the way, we're going to post this job and you can't apply because you don't have this experience. So that's kind of caregiving. Like, would you do that to your child? And say, sorry, kiddo, can't do that. You don't have the skill set. You won't do that to your kid. So anyway.
And Ted, that's where I want to say, the stories you're sharing, that's where the question and check-ins, are you okay? Having a check-in, where are you at? That builds bridges, that forges those connections so that people don't have to, allies, men, any number from intersections don't have to sit in silence and wonder what they can do, because they've forged that relationship, that connection to say, are you okay? And you can say, actually, no, I'm not, because I'm wondering about ABC. So it puts that piece together. Or people are saying, I've gone through this. They would have already heard that story from you and known that's a place for them to step in and say, why would you say that to her? Why would you do that? So that's that relationship building. And Ed wants to say something.
Yeah.
He's in chat.
Yeah, Kriz, for the men on the call, this is an acquirable skill, but just what Kriz was just talking about, but also it's only acquirable by making mistakes and getting feedback. If we hang out till we get it right, we're leaving women out there twisting in the wind. That's really what I have to say. You got to practice it. You got to make mistakes and be open to a woman saying, "Excuse me, but you just spoke for me rather than with me as my ally."
Hey, Kriz, can I weigh in as well?
Yes.
I think the great thing to kind of say to any man in that situation is, would you say that to your wife? Would you say that to your mother? Would you say that about your daughter? I think, really give them perspective, because I by golly, if I was in that room, I would say, yeah, she's amazing, and I bet she could do that, but why would she? She has the right to have children. She's bringing up our future generation, and I hope that it's better than the comment that you just made. It's just standing up for one another and challenging the men. Men, they see things through that perspective. I was lucky. I was in a breakout room with 3 men today, and it was really nice to hear them and what they had to say and how they can be allies for women here.
And awareness comes with, one thing that I want to bring up, and I'll bring it up later in another call in the future, being the only one in a room. I'm often the only single parent, the only queer identified person, the only doesn't look like it because I passed multiracial person in my partnership, and they're 4 white men. That's a lot to show up with that. I've got to show up, in all kinds of superhero ways to be able to feel safe and to do that. And these are 4 men whom I love deeply and am in regular relationship with. So the burden of the only is a big thing. So however we can read the room and show up and bring that in, that's really important. Don't underestimate it. Amy, do you want to, we're at 2 minutes till. So Amy, if you want to add one last piece, and then we can go to, our moving forward, we want to ask about what behavior will you normalize in the workplace. Add that in chat, and let's let Amy bring us home.
Well, actually, I am just really struck by the comment made in chat, which is, if a man is committed advocate, he must find a way to stand beside those targeted without doing them. This is a skill acquired by practice over time and community. I think I've just written that down. The second time I've written down something you said here during this session, Ed. And I think that is really the biggest takeaway for me from this is, that it is a skill acquired by over time. This capacity to, meaningfully engage with difficult subjects that are about patterns and entrenched behavior that conscious. And it just gives me a lot of hope that there is this community with leaders like you, Kriz, and you, Ed, who recognize that this is something that it's not, you don't just wake up one day and realize, oh, wow, there's sexism or, racism or, caregiverism. It's something that we have to work for every day, in our own minds and in the communities in which we operate. And this idea of not rescuing, but standing beside is just really powerful. So I'm grateful to be here and grateful that this community exists.
I want to give 3 more seconds to Ed saying, answering Michelle in chat, what advocating but not rescuing might look like. And that'll be our final wrap. And we will be bringing more of this back because very rich.
There's not enough time, but fundamentally rescuing, I think it's what I said earlier, rescuing your speaking for someone, whereas to be an advocate, you've got to be speaking with them. I don't mean in a conversation, I mean centering the person's voice, the woman's voice, rather than your own, to say, somebody gave the example, to say something like, why would you say that? Or do you know you just interrupted her? Or my favorite, she had that idea 20 minutes ago and you just said it like you thought of it. That sort of thing. Rather than, oh, poor thing, are you okay? He just interrupted you, which would be a dysfunctional rescue. That's what I got, Kriz, and we are
at time, and I want to bring us, wrap it up on when you're in relationship with people, these things come a lot more naturally, and those relationships require nurturing as well. So
in practice.
What's next? Thank you, Ed. We will email you the link to the recording. We'll email you a link to join our Slack community. We have additional resources and we're always updating them. And if you have any questions, email me, and guess what? I'm taking time for a couple of weeks. So you'll get rerouted to someone else who can help you. And thank you, Tet, and thank you, Amy, for bringing your voices. Thank you to all of my partners and everyone at the Better Man Movement. And mostly thank you everybody here who showed up, contributed your voice, and keep joining us so that we can keep coming up with solutions and ways that we can be the change and bring the change and share it, because I think it can be contagious. Thank you all.